It often feels like we're just swimming in headlines, doesn't it? Information overload is definitely real, makes it incredibly tough to truly grasp what's happening, beneath the surface of global events. Today, we're trying to cut through some of that noise. We're exploring a conflict that simmered for decades, and now, well, it appears to have reached a critical boiling point. That's the escalating tension between Israel and Iran. Our mission in this deep dive is to unpack the complexities using the very sources you've shared with us. This isn't just about catching up on news, it's about uncovering maybe some surprising facts and understanding the profound, sometimes unexpected, global implications.
Exactly. And it's so important to move beyond just the surface level news. We need to grasp the full scope of this situation and understand why it matters to everyone, not just those directly involved over there. In this deep dive, we'll try to connect the dots between the recent military actions, uh, the deep-seated political motivations, and the very real economic consequences that could ripple out globally. Understanding these links is really key, I think, to making sense of our increasingly interconnected world.
Okay, so the reports we've looked at, they paint a pretty stark picture of how quickly things have escalated recently. What did our sources reveal about the immediate actions, what's happening on the ground?
Well, the sources clearly show we've entered uh, a critical new phase. It's marked by some extremely concerning developments, particularly involving the United States. There are reported U.S. aircraft attacks on Iran's Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan nuclear sites. And as you can imagine, Iran's reaction was swift and very strong. They've called these acts a blatant violation of their sovereignty, basically a direct act of war against them, which of course immediately ratcheted up the tension significantly.
And Iran's response to that specifically, what did they do?
Right after those reported strikes, Iran immediately issued these stern warnings to the United States. They stated very clearly that all options are reserved for their self-defense. That's the quote. At the same time, they initiated continuous missile attacks on Israel, which have reportedly caused injuries. And then on the diplomatic front, Iran quickly escalated things by demanding an urgent United Nations Security Council meeting, a UNSC meeting to address it all.
And Israel, of course, hasn't just stood by. Our sources detail reciprocal actions. Israel launching retaliatory airstrikes on Iranian military bases, multiple airports, too. The reports even paint a vivid picture mentions of overnight gunfire, sirens blaring in both Tel Aviv and Tehran. It really underscores how direct and intense these exchanges have become.
Yeah, and what's truly fascinating here, maybe a bit unexpected, is the broader regional angle, especially regarding Hezbollah. Normally, Iran-backed groups like Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, they're usually very active against Israel. But our sources indicate Hezbollah has, this time, refrained from direct, full-scale war. The reasons cited are quite revealing: internal issues within Lebanon, apparently, and significant pressure from the Lebanese government itself to avoid dragging the country into a bigger conflict. This kind of nuanced behavior tells us a lot about the complex web of alliances and the domestic pressures that can sometimes override these external loyalties in the region.
And something that really jumps out from these sources, and it's a huge global concern, is Iran's threat to close the Strait of Hormuz. Now, for anyone unfamiliar, this isn't just any waterway, it's arguably the most vital global oil trade route. Full stop. Our sources emphasize its immense significance. They note a staggering 85% of India's crude oil passes right through this strait. That alone has significantly heightened India's concerns about potential disruptions. And it's not just the direct oil cost, is it? The mere threat of closing it.
Exactly. The threat alone can send shockwaves through global shipping. It drives up insurance premiums for every vessel that even goes near the region. That's a hidden cost, right? It trickles down to everything on ourselves eventually, even if the strait never actually closes.
So tying this together, what about the bigger players, the superpower?
Well, connecting this to the bigger picture, we do see a kind of alignment of superpowers emerging, which further complicates things. Iran has reportedly sought assistance from Russia. That signals a hardening of fronts, maybe a desire for external backing. On the other side, the United States has expressed a willingness to restart talks with Iran. That's potentially a diplomatic lifeline, maybe aimed at averting what could become a prolonged and, frankly, devastating war. This interplay between confrontation and potential negotiation really highlights the delicate balance, doesn't it? Every move is being watched by so many players.
But to really get why we're at this critical point, we need to look beyond just the immediate headlines. We need to understand the deep historical currents that brought us here. This isn't just a sudden flare-up, is it?
Absolutely not, no. The sources point to several key contributing factors, and many of these have been simmering for decades. First and foremost, you have Iran's nuclear program. Israel views this program as an existential threat. They're absolutely committed to stopping it. Iran, on the other hand, consistently claims its program is purely for peaceful civilian purposes. This fundamental disagreement is a constant underlying tension.
Okay, so the nuclear program is one big piece. What else?
Then there's the intense competition for regional influence, dominance in the Middle East. Iran supports various proxy groups, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, which Israel designates as terrorist organizations. And this strategy, this use of proxies, further fuels the animosity. This leads directly to what Iran calls its axis of resistance strategy. It's their concerted effort to counter U.S. and Israeli influence using these allied groups, creating a network of anti-Israel forces right around its borders.
And the recent attacks fit into this how?
Well, the recent direct attacks, Israel's reported strikes on Iranian nuclear sites, and Iran's retaliatory missile strikes, those, served as the immediate trigger for this direct confrontation we're seeing now. But finally, we can't ignore the deep historical enmity. Relations between the two nations have been incredibly tense ever since the 1979 Iranian Revolution. After that revolution, Israel was explicitly regarded as Iran's staunch enemy. So it's this complex tapestry of historical grievances, strategic rivalries, and recent triggers.
So when we look at the actual military might, both nations are formidable, yes, but our sources show their strengths are in very different areas. It's not just about who has more soldiers or tanks, but what kind of power they can project in a modern conflict.
Yes, and this is where the details become really crucial, and the asymmetry, the difference, truly stands out. Our sources give us a pretty clear snapshot of their respective military capabilities. In terms of just sheer personnel, Iran has a much larger military overall, over 1 million soldiers if you include active and paramilitary forces. Israel, though smaller in total numbers, fields a substantial force of nearly 700,000. And what's noteworthy there is the high proportion of rapidly deployable reserves. So, larger overall force for Iran, perhaps, but Israel has a highly trained and ready reserve force.
And on the ground, tanks, armored vehicles, do the numbers favor one side there?
For ground forces, yeah, if you just look at tanks and armored vehicles, Iran has a numerical advantage. Roughly 2,000 tanks compared to Israel's 1,300 or so, and significantly more armored vehicles for Iran, too. However, when we shift to air power, the picture just dramatically flips. Our sources really highlight that Israel has a substantial lead in airstrike capability. They call it their biggest weapon. Israel has around 612 aircraft, including 241 modern fighter jets, and notably those advanced F-35s. Iran, by contrast, has about 551 aircraft, but only 186 are fighter jets, and most of those are older models. So this means Israel can project power and conduct precision strikes with a technological edge that Iran largely lacks in its air force.
Okay, that's air power. What about missiles? They've been so central to the recent escalation and to Iran's whole strategy, it seems.
Right. Missiles are key. Iran possesses a very large number of missiles, including the Shahab-3, which has about a 2,000-kilometer range, and the hypersonic Fate 1 and 10. These can definitely reach Israel and other targets in the region. Now, Israel has fewer missiles overall, but they are generally more advanced and precise. Things like the nuclear-capable Jericho-3 ICBM, that's an intercontinental ballistic missile, with an impressive 4,800-kilometer range. Plus, they have LoRa air-launched ballistic missiles and Spice-T 2000 guided missiles. So while Iran might have quantity, Israel seems to have a qualitative advantage in missile technology, including the ability to strike at much longer ranges.
And quickly, the Navy, how do they compare there?
In naval assets, Iran has 101 vessels listed. That includes 7 frigates, 3 corvettes, and 19 submarines, giving it a notable presence, especially in the Gulf. Israel has fewer, 67 naval assets listed, including 7 corvettes and 5 submarines.
So it really isn't just about who has more guns, is it? It's about who has the right kind of capabilities for this kind of fight. This raises a big question. How do these different strengths, quantity versus quality, tech edge versus numbers, how do they actually play out in modern warfare, especially in a conflict this intense? Do our sources suggest one capability effectively cancels out the other, or does it create entirely new risks?
It really looks like a classic case of asymmetric warfare. Israel's technological superiority, particularly in air power and those advanced missile systems, lets it project power far beyond its borders and execute precision strikes. This kind of forces Iran, despite its larger ground forces and sheer number of older aircraft, to rely heavily on its huge missile arsenal for long-range deterrence and, well, asymmetric responses. It suggests that while maybe a ground invasion might be challenging for Israel, its ability to degrade Iranian infrastructure and military assets from the air and with precision missiles is pretty significant. This dynamic certainly creates a high-stakes game where each side is playing to its strengths, and that can lead to really unpredictable escalations.
Okay, so let's bring this back to the listener. Why should you care about this conflict beyond the headlines? The potential outcomes, according to our sources, they're truly global. This isn't just about two nations, it's about a ripple effect that could touch everyone's daily life, even far from the conflict zone itself.
Yeah, the potential consequences are severe and really far-reaching. They extend well beyond the immediate region. Economically, we're looking at the very real expectation of a massive surge in crude oil prices, and that directly translates to increased costs for petrol, diesel, LPG, things consumers worldwide use every day. This situation would get significantly worse if Iran actually followed through on the threat to close the Strait of Hormuz, choking off a major global oil supply.
Right, and rising oil prices feed into everything else.
Exactly. Rising oil and gas prices would inevitably fuel global inflation. It directly impacts everyday budgets, making everything from groceries to transport more expensive for you.
And it's not just oil prices directly, is it? The trade routes themselves are critical for, well, our globalized economy.
Absolutely. The disruption of vital maritime trade routes like the Red Sea and the Strait of Hormuz would mean much more expensive freight costs and significant supply chain disruptions across all sorts of industries, electronics, clothing, you name it. This has particular consequences for countries like India, for example. Sources mention a staggering $3.6 trillion in trade with West Asian nations potentially at risk. Even India's substantial $550 million investment in the Chabahar port project could face a serious crisis if things escalate badly.
Beyond the economic impact, which is huge, there's the human cost.
Yes, the profound human cost. Heavy loss of life has already happened, unfortunately. And this is projected to increase significantly if the war escalates further. Crucially, the sources highlight the grave risk of, and this is a direct quote, Chernobyl-style devastation from any attacks on nuclear sites. That's a truly chilling prospect, isn't it? It just underscores the potential humanitarian catastrophe at stake here.
And then there's the broader geopolitical fallout. This feels like it could reshape alliances, global power dynamics.
Precisely. The conflict could further destabilize the entire Middle East. It could potentially spill over into neighboring countries, creating wider regional chaos, maybe even a cascade of smaller conflicts. On a global scale, probably the most concerning prospect mentioned is the direct involvement of Russia and the United States. If that happened, it could escalate the conflict into a much larger global confrontation, raising the chilling specter of a third world war.
Yeah.
It's a scenario no one wants to even contemplate. And finally, any large-scale conflict like this would undoubtedly lead to massive displacement of people. We'd be looking at a significant refugee crisis that would affect nations worldwide, placing immense strain on international resources and goodwill.
So this deep dive, it's really shown us that what's unfolding between Israel and Iran is far, far more than just a regional power struggle. It's economic, it's humanitarian, its geopolitical consequences could truly ripple across the entire world, touching lives and economies in ways many of us might not immediately think about.
Yeah, and if we connect this to that bigger picture again, it really raises an important question for you, the listener. How do the individual actions of nations, even when they seem sort of contained within a region, how do they reveal this delicate web that links us all in the global community? How does it make every decision potentially a global tremor?
That's a powerful thought to consider and definitely a reminder of how interconnected we all are. We hope this deep dive has given you a clearer, maybe more nuanced understanding of this critical global dynamic. Keep exploring, keep learning, and keep being well informed. It matters.